Well, good morning. Hope everyone's doing well this morning. Welcome to the combined Heroes of Business College of Business Chapel, along with the Women's Chapel. Ladies, thank you for allowing us to join you this morning. We're honored to have as our guest this morning Miss Jan Babiak and her husband Brian. I'll introduce her and Brian again after our period of worship, but Dr. Benny Harris is going to lead some singing for us this morning as we worship together. Professor Leanne Smith is prepared to read a couple of important scriptures that she thinks will be meaningful, and then after Dr. Harris leads another song and a prayer, we'll introduce Miss Babiak to each of you. Dr. Harris?
This is Babiak. We're so excited about having you speak to us at Lipscomb, and looking very much forward to all you have to share with us. And we're going to be blessed by it and inspired by it as well. So thank you so very much. We're going to sing a couple of songs. There's a song called that I love to sing, I Keep Falling in Love with You, over and over and over again. I sang that to my wife when she was my girlfriend, and she was impressed. So guys, listen to it and may get you married and stay married for 22 years now. So, but it's, I keep falling in love with you over and over and over and over again. I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. It gets sweeter and sweeter as the days go by. Oh, what a love between my Lord and I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. Do you get it now? I know you catch on to songs very easily. My son listens to rap, and within 1 minute he has all the words, so I know you got this one. Are you ready? I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. It gets sweeter and sweeter as the days go by. Oh, what a love between my Lord and I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. It gets sweeter and sweeter as the days go by. Oh, what a love between my Lord and I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again.
Amen. Thank you, Benny Harris, Dr. Harris. I met Jan several months ago at a breakfast, and I was so impressed with your courage. When I was thinking in a word, what would be an appropriate scripture to talk about, I knew I wanted to talk about fearlessness and courage. So listen to these words from Deuteronomy 31. This is when Moses is talking to the people, including Joshua, his mentee, and telling them what the Lord has told him. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. Moses summons Joshua forward and says to him again in the presence of all, be strong and courageous. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. In Joshua 1:6, following the death of Moses, God repeats this message to Joshua. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people. Be strong and very courageous. If one quality is needed in a leader, it's courage and the absence of fear. One of the things I love about mentoring programs is that one of the best takeaways for young people is risk-taking. their aptitude to take risks is increased if they have a mentor that encourages them to stretch. Paul uses similar language in closing his first letter to the Corinthian church. In 16:13, he says, "Stand firm in the faith, be men of courage." I think that counts for women. Be strong, do everything in love. And then the Hebrew writer draws from God's charge in Joshua 13:5, or to Joshua in Hebrews 13:5, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me?"
Thank you, Benny and Leanne. Thank you both for your leadership this morning. I'm delighted this morning to introduce you to Jan Babiak. Jan, we welcome you and Brian to our campus. Thank you all for being here this morning. In fact, let me introduce Brian Babiak. Brian, will you stand up and let the audience welcome you to Lipscomb? Thank you. Jan, the Heroes of Business program is a series that we began about 5 or 6 years ago after we realized that many of our students who have grown up in an era where all they heard about in business was people who had done bad things. And so we felt it was very important to bring to our campus business leaders of the highest caliber who were also Christians and people who could be great examples to say that you can be in business and you can be successful, but you can also maintain your values. And so we're delighted that some of the predecessors who have gone before you include people like Jim Griffith, who's the CEO of the Timken Company, a $5 billion corporation. Last fall, we had Deanna Smith, who's the CEO of Sarah Cannon Research Institute, a $4 billion business. We've had R.A. Dickey, who won the Cy Young Award when he was pitching for the New York Mets, also a businessman. We've had a number of outstanding people, and we're delighted today that you joined that list of outstanding honorees. So thank you so much for being here. The mission of the College of Business is to develop business leaders who embrace the virtues and values of Jesus. And I can't imagine any honoree that we could have who could do that and show that any better than Jan Babiak. Her biography would be so long that if I were to tell you everything that she's accomplished, it would take all of her time. So I won't do that, but I will say that Jan retired several years ago as a managing director, one of the highest officers of Ernst & Young worldwide. We have many aspiring accountants here this morning. Charles Frazier's here, who's the chair of our accounting department, the dean of accounting chairs in the state of Tennessee. So I think we probably have a number of students in the audience who will be impressed with the fact that you spent 3 decades at the largest global accounting firm, and congratulations on that. She led the technology, climate change, sustainability, regulatory, and public policy practices of Ernst & Young in the United Kingdom. She lived in London for a number of years. And then in 2009, she decided to change course entirely. She retired from her accounting career, and she became a public company director. And today, she serves on the boards of Walgreens. I think all of us know Walgreens. She also serves on the board of the Bank of Montreal. Now, you may not be as familiar with the Bank of Montreal, but I believe that's about a $550 billion organization, so she has great responsibilities at that bank. And that she's also on the board of the Royal Mail Group. And I'm almost certain that there are many students here who won't recognize what the Royal Mail Group is, but that's the Postal Service in the United Kingdom. And so she's on the board of what would be the equivalent of what we call the post office here in the United States. She and Brian met when they were both students at the University of Oklahoma, and so they're Sooners. And you can talk to them about football and Southeastern Conference if you want to when you get a chance to visit with her in a few minutes. After they had lived in London for 20 years, they made a little bit of a change in course. They moved from London to Leaper's Fork. And I'll let her tell you how they chose Leaper's Fork, because as I have heard the story, they selected Tennessee without ever having visited here. And I'll let her explain how they managed to decide they wanted to move to Tennessee from London and how they picked Leaper's Fork as where they wanted to live. Brian told me a few minutes ago that they moved from a 1,900 square foot flat in London to 19 acres in Leaper's Fork. And I think he's now decided that's not such a great idea because he has to cut the grass every summer. So with that, Jan, may I ask you to come to the platform, please? And I'm going to unwrap your award here, if I can get it out. And this is the Heroes of Business Award, and it's going to be hard for the audience to see this, but as you can see, it says Lipscomb College of Business, Heroes of Business 2014, presented to Jan Babiak. So congratulations. I'll be the safekeeper. All right.
Wow. For the really wonderful comments you've made. They're quite generous and incredible, actually. I have to say that I'm still a little surprised to find myself standing here today. Last summer, the dean asked me to campus, and I joyfully accepted, and we were sitting in a room, and there were pictures of all of these amazing individuals that he was talking about earlier, and I was kind of in awe and really inspired by it. I mean, if nothing else, I had the guy who's at Sonic, and Sonic's like my favorite burger. We get off a plane from London, and we don't go to Family, we go to Sonic, so I can get a cheeseburger. And so when he said, we would like you to be, one of our heroes of business, honestly, I sat there and thought, okay, this must be how a donkey feels when they're asked to run the Kentucky Derby. I just felt really like, yeah, you can put a saddle on me, but it ain't going to end well. So, it was a interesting request. But as I sat and listened to him talk about the Heroes of Business program, the series, and why it existed, it became really obvious to me that this had much less to do with me and more to do with the amazing teams that I've had the honor to work with across my career. Now, I have actually physically been on the ground and worked in more than 50 countries. I have worked with tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people. And let me tell you, 99% of these people, business people, are good, honest people who are trying to make a living for themselves, to support their families, to support their employees, their employers, their shareholders, and even society. And that's what the Heroes of Business is all about. But sadly, the news, that just doesn't sell papers. Don't you find it interesting that if you turn on the news, they say, good evening, and then spend the next 40 minutes telling you what's wrong with the world? And so you kind of have to find a way to think about this in a more positive light. And that's one of the things that I'm so impressed with Lipscomb, because an organization as prestigious as this, putting a bright light on all these great people who are doing great things in business. So I thought I'd talk to you today about three things. The first one is why we should all, whatever choices we make in life, whatever choices for our own livelihoods or for whatever we want to do, we should all be champions of business, just like Lipscomb. The second thing I'm going to talk about, this is because the dean asked me to talk about it, because otherwise it probably wouldn't be what I would choose to talk about, but he did promise to buy me lunch if I did. I'm going to talk about myself, and I'm going to talk about why I chose business. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about, my own suggestions for how you can be in business and still, live true to your values. So that's kind of what I'm planning to go through. So let's start with the first one, why we should all be champions for business. One of my favorite sayings is, the fish is the last one to know about the sea. Okay, the fish is the last one to know about the sea. Now, what that basically means is that sometimes we get so deep into something that somebody has to point out to us the obvious of what we're involved in. And in this context, I think society is the fish, and business is the sea. Because no matter what you choose to do, even if you're one of these people who says business is evil, I believe all the press, this is not a good thing, I want nothing to do with it, I am going to save the planet, I'm going to save souls, I'm going to do good. Even if you say that, I put to you that you need to understand business. Because at some point, you're going to have to probably raise some funding. You can call it revenue, you can call it, contributions, but you're probably going to have to make a business case for that. You're going to have to put your vision into a way that somebody who's got some money is willing to part with it. You're going to have to manage your expenses. You're going to have to figure out how to use your assets to the best effect. You're going to have to know how to honor your liabilities. And these are all things that are required no matter what you choose to do. This is whether or not you choose, as I said, to do some great philanthropic endeavor, whether you choose to be a doctor, a musician, a painter, a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, whatever you choose, you really need to understand this. Now, the second reason why I think it's important that we support business is because business is actually good. It provides food, it provides cars, it provides transport, it provides all the things we need, and a reasonable number of things we don't need, but besides that, it creates jobs, it creates infrastructure, and it supports global competitiveness. It's all good. And going back to my earlier point, 99% of the people involved in this are doing it for the right reasons. So we should all be champions of business wherever we come from. Which brings me to point 2, which is a bit about my background and where I've come from. Ending a sentence in a preposition in an educational institution, probably not the best thing, but I'm going to move on. So I'm going to talk about that and why I chose business. Now, I'd like to say that I chose business because of some grand calling, or because of some mentor or great example that I saw in my life, or because of the fact that there was an entrepreneurial idea that I had. But the truth is, I kind of thought business was my best way out of poverty. It was as simple as that. And that may not be the cool reason, but it is the reason. I grew up in most of my childhood in trailer parks. And I'll pause for a second just to point out to you, because many of you will not have experience with trailer parks, that there's actually a lot more treasure than trash in these trailer parks. They're really good people. Now, that's not what Jerry Springer and some, redneck comedians would have you believe, but I'm telling you that is the truth. But from my mind's eye, and let's go back to maybe when I was 7, what I saw was that there was one common theme that really influenced everything, and this was money. Because I found that when people were in a good mood, it was because it was payday, and when people were in a bad mood, it was because they had an absence of money. The refrigerator broke down, the washing machine broke down, they didn't have quarters to put them in at the laundromat. Whatever reason, the absence of money caused that. And I really thought, we got to do something about it. There's too many unhappy people around here. We need to do something about this. Now, what I didn't really understand was my parents. God bless them. My parents were great, but they kind of had this view that, you give to the church, you give to the evangelists on the radio, you give to the people less fortunate than us, which were pretty much the homeless people, and they were always giving. And when we would sometimes have to go to bed either hungry or having only had, mac and cheese, I didn't quite understand that. And when I would raise it with my parents, while we were giving away money and we didn't seem to have enough of our own, they would say, well, the Bible says that those who suffer on earth will have great rewards in heaven. Okay. Now, to me, heaven seemed a long way off, at 7. I mean, it was well and good for my parents. I mean, they were like 25, so, they were much closer to heaven than I was. And if you figured out my grandparents, oh my God, they were 40, they were really close to it. So I kind of thought, okay, I want some of this now, because I have never been the most patient of people, and I'm afraid that's still true today. Never gotten over that one. Pray for me. So in trying to do this, I'm going to try to figure out a way to get this. Now, in my household, the only way to make a business case on anything was through the scripture. So, listening in Sunday school, Proverbs 14:3. Most of you probably didn't learn that one, but it basically says, no matter how much a lazy person wants something, they will not get it. But a hard worker will get everything they want. So I figure hard work. This was the answer for me. So at the age of 7, I started my first business. By the time I was 11, I had a business with employees, local children who all worked for me. I would sell the work around the neighborhood, and I would take 10% agency fee, make sure they showed up, make sure they did a good job. Now, this worked out pretty well, but let me tell you something. For those of you who are thinking about going into business, children are really not good employees. They don't show up, they get grounded, they're just really problematic. So by the time I became 14, I basically decided, okay, I'm done with this, and I went into proper business. I went into food service and worked in a real restaurant where they took out taxes. Back then they didn't really check your age and all, so that worked really well until they would find out how old I was, and I would get fired and I'd have to move on to the next place that didn't check records well. By the time I was 16, I was solid. But anyway, so I worked in food service throughout high school. And when I say I worked 40 hours a week all the way through high school and into university. I was still working in food service, sometimes multiple jobs. And then later, toward the end of my college career, the last few years, I was actually in law enforcement. And if we had more time, I could tell you some really amazing stories about the night that I took down a 300-pound linebacker in a bar brawl. I think he's with the Broncos now. And so you guys have to wait for that one, for those of you who were watching Sunday. Anyway, okay. Or the night that I had a guy with a gun in my face and I convinced him to put it down. Or the night that I took down the entirety of the state of Oklahoma's BOLO system. Now, that one was problematic because I started to say grounded, but that's not the right word. I got suspended for 3 days without pay, which was the really bothersome part of this at that particular point in my life for doing this. And it was actually part of a retaliatory strike against a prankster of one of my coworkers who was forever giving me grief and bullying me. And I thought I would make it even a little bit, but sadly I kind of overachieved and took down the whole state. I remember standing in the chief of police office as he was giving me a serious dressing down, and I said, look, if a college sophomore can take down the entire state, perhaps you need a little better security. And so this was my first bit of IT consulting and security advice, which later on I would build a career on it and get paid for it. And of course, lots of other college students have built careers on actually hacking, but I stand before you as the first. But I didn't make any money, just to be clear. I didn't steal anybody's credit cards, although there may have been a few criminals who got away that during that time frame. Anyway, but let's move on, because as I said, I don't have time to talk about those stories. So my last year at university, I was in a parking lot one day trying to park, and you guys will understand how difficult it is to find a good parking place on campus, and believe me, OU is no different than this place. I was trying to find a parking place, and there were two guys, a really cute young man and a college professor, who was, a bit older, who was, they were blocking the parking lot, moving a parachute from one car to the other. And I'm trying to get through, and after a bit of banter over it, I find out that the young man is the president of the OU Sport Parachute Club, and the professor was the academic advisor to the club. Now, why Scott Evers needed academic advisors, I don't know, and it didn't become any clearer later, because eventually I did make 150 skydives. But I told the young man that I'd always wanted to skydive. And this was not a come on because he was cute. This was because I really did. And the reason I wanted to was because when I was 9, I saw this movie called Fathom with Raquel Welch, and she was a skydiving dental assistant turned spy. Very believable premise. And because I just thought she was the most beautiful woman, and indeed I still think she's the most beautiful woman. I would be her any day, but I was pretty much not qualified on about any level. So, but maybe I could skydive. So I did end up skydiving. This guy ended up being my skydiving instructor. And more importantly, a year after the parking lot incident, he became my husband. And so, I have been married to this wonderful, amazing, really smart, and incredibly supportive man for 33 years as of New Year's Eve. And all of that applause is for him, because anybody who's going to put up with me for that long deserves all the applause they can get. So now the other thing about meeting Brian was the fact that he introduced me to the skydiving community, and this had the biggest, most profound impact on my career. Now that may not make much sense to you, so let me explain. So one of the skydivers that we jumped with regularly was a woman named Mary, and she was actually married to a guy named John, who was a big 8, as was then, now they're big 4, but a big 8 partner. And she had a party at her house for all the skydiving community. Okay, so we go to this house, and oh my goodness. I mean, it was 2 stories, it had carpet all the way through as opposed to the linoleum I was more accustomed to. It had a swimming pool in the backyard. It had a room in the house that was not the kitchen that they ate in. I was amazed at this home, and I was like, what does this man do? Whatever he does, that's what I'm going to do. And I set my sights on becoming a big 8 partner. So as I said, I'd like to say that I had some grand design, but for me it was about financial stability so that I could overcome what heredity and the lifestyle I was born into would have me, which is probably, right now, I would probably be in a double Y because I am a high achiever, and I would probably have 10 grandchildren by now. And that would be a good life, I'm sure, because as I said, lots of treasure there, but I've chosen a different one. And that kind of brings me into the last part of my talk, which is about why somebody, who grew up with a value system, as I would have, could find business an appropriate place to be. Now, if you read the press, you hear about LIBOR, and you hear about the, all of the scandals with, on Wall Street, and and what this is doing to our society. And this is not new. This is not something that's just happened in this decade. We've had Enron, and we've had WorldCom, and we've had just repeat after repeat. And even in the 80s, when I was graduating, we had the savings and loan debacle, and we had Ivan Boesky and the insider trading. So I had to look and say, how can I be a part of this? But the reality is I've always had the ability to look and see beyond the obvious. And it became clear to me even then that there were a lot of really good people in business. And you get to choose the examples that you follow. And I have found throughout business that watching other people, learning from the great examples, and also learning from the bad examples. Some of the best skills I have, I learned from people who were really not very good. And I learned what not to do. People I worked for, and I thought, if I am ever in charge of any of these things, I will never do that. So you can learn from both the good and the bad. You just have to take those values within yourself. So whatever I was doing in my career, I would look at, I had kind of 5 criteria, if you will, that I looked at. Whether I was building a global IT security and counter cyber terrorism practice, or whether I was building a climate change and sustainability practice, or whether I was dealing with the regulatory issues of 97 countries, or whether I'm serving on the amazing boards that I'm blessed to serve on today. I kind of always looked at it from the standpoint of these 5 criteria, if you will. But more importantly, in due course, I learned that if I applied those 5 criteria in my hiring decisions, we ended up with great teams. And these are not things like, somebody who's really, really smart, great intellect, or a great degree, all due respect. It wasn't about whether or not they had, the right, heritage, or grew up in the right family, lived on the right side of town. These things were true across all of these factors. It wasn't even whether they had great experience. So I'm going to tell you what these 5 criteria are. I call them my vows. That's not as in I take thee, Brian. This is as in, Vanna, can I buy a vow? So we're going to talk about A, which is attitude. You can't pick your height. You can't pick your skin color. You can't pick a lot of things, but you can pick your attitude. And, I find that if I had the choice when I was hiring people, if I had a B student or even a C student that had a great attitude, I would take them every day over an A student who felt entitled, which probably lets you know that E is not for entitled. E is for excellence. It's about doing a great job no matter what you do. Whether you're making coffee, whether you're making copies, or whether you're negotiating a big deal, whatever you're doing, do it with excellence, because you'll stand out. and this will be so obvious to the people around you. I know that I made copies with the best attitude and made sure that they all lined up and they were two-sided just like they were supposed to be, and I know that that impacted very much whatever successes I had. And again, going back to Proverbs 13:4, hard work. Hard work, you get what you want from that standpoint. So the next one is I, and I is for integrity, morals, ethics, making sure you have built the value system in and the people you hire have that. I remember once I was looking to hire a very experienced partner from one of the other big firms. He had a stellar reputation for delivering great results across the whole of Europe, outstanding character, interviewed brilliantly. As we were closing in on the final negotiations of his salary, he says to me, and when I come over, I'll bring over all the bid sheets and documentation from the other firm. Now, this would have given us a great advantage competitively, but I withdrew the offer because I knew that if he cheated on them, he would cheat on me.